Hey everyone, welcome back to 1:35 a.m. The New Kid. This, so far the story has been a bit of a slow burn. I'm thinking it's gonna be kind of like To Be Beautiful, where it was kind of boring towards the first half, but afterwards things got kind of crazy. At least that's what I'm hoping for. Uh, so let's continue. Devin was surprised when he saw Mick step forward and say to Kelsey, I thought just me and Devin were going with you today. Kelsey frowned and looked at everyone. Devin knew the problem. Kelsey was asking himself, should I be a jerk and blow off the two losers, or should I ignore the pretty girls? It wasn't going to be a tough choice. Kelsey was still holding Heather's hand. George spoke up. How about this? We'll do 2 trips. I'll take some of you kids over there, then I'll come back for the rest. It's only a 10-minute drive, the wait won't be that long. Kelsey released a pent-up breath. Thanks, George. Heather grinned at Kelsey and pulled him toward the pickup's passenger door. Come on. We can share the front seat. I'm small enough that we can both fit under the seatbelt. She giggled. Kelsey shrugged and let Heather lead him to the front of the pickup. The others piled in the back of the pickup. Quincy pushed Mick back as he squeezed in after the other 3 girls. For a second, it looked like George was going to protect the number of the kids in the back seat, but then he shrugged and got behind the wheel. All 4 doors slammed. George put his window down. I'll be back for you, boys. As soon as George started his 6.2-liter V8, whatever that meant, engine, Devin's cocoon collapsed. He actually felt his ears pop as the air around him seemed to adjust to real space and time again. His senses went on high alert, too. The first thing he smelled was the grape soda in Mick's go-cup. Then he got a whiff of gasoline as the big red truck drove away with Devin's short-lived optimism. He knew it was too good to be true. He felt Mick tug at his shirt. Want to sit over there and wait? Mick pointed at the curb and sucked through his straw. He plunked his padded rump on the curb and piled his backpack and extra books next to him. A car full of kids blasted past them, and someone let out a shrill whistle. Someone else shouted, Losers! Devin put his back to the driveway. He turned around toward the woods and said, I'm not waiting. I'm going home. Mick pulled his mouth from his straw. His upper lip was stained purple. Why? Devin glanced down at Mick. He looked pathetic sitting there with his go-cup. Devin wanted to snap at him and walk away, but 10 years of friendship and thousands of in-it-together fingerlings kept his temper somewhat under control. Seriously? You're asking me why? Mick frowned, then nodded. Devin sighed and sat down on the curb next to Mick. Do you really think that after 30 minutes it'll take for George to drive them there, come back for us, and then get us there, we're going to be welcomed into the group? Don't you think it might be just a little bit, and I'm being very, very sarcastic right now in case you're missing it, awkward? Mick had to think about that for several seconds. Devin waited. Finally, Mick sighed. Yeah, I see what you mean. He sniffed and sucked on his straw. Why did Kelsey do that? Why didn't he have them wait? Again, seriously? You're asking that? Did you not see him make a move on Heather? Mick twisted his lips and looked up out at the corner of his eyes as if watching a replay on a tiny screen up and off to the right. He frowned. I thought she made a move on him. Whatever. He went along when she suggested they share the front seat. Mick thought that over and nodded. True. Devin stood. So, are you coming with me or not? Mick sighed. Yeah, I guess so. He lifted his backpack, and Devin picked up Mick's extra stack of books. Does this mean we can't have our clubhouse at Kelsey's house? Mick asked, as they started walking toward the woods. Yes, I think that's exactly what this means. Mick was still feeling a little bummed about what happened with Kelsey when he met Devin for their hike on Saturday morning. He tried not to let things bother him too much. If he did, he'd be miserable all the time. He didn't want to be miserable. Mick and Devin lived in a neighborhood that wasn't as nice as Mick wished it was. It wasn't awful, but he'd seen much worse, but it wasn't good either. Left over from when the town was owned by the logging company, the houses in their neighborhood were small, old, and pretty much identical, except for the cars and junk that sat next to them. When Mick and his parents moved into their house, they told Mick it was just temporary. He wouldn't have to share his room with his little sister forever, but he was still sharing his room with his little sister Debbie, something that was only bearable because Debbie, who liked to sew, made a curtain to divide their tiny room. That and the fact that they both had earphones and mostly spent their time reading or on their computers kept them from wanting to kill each other. Sometimes Mick envied Devin because Devin had his own room, but then he remembered Devin didn't have a dad. Not even a lazy dad who never made enough money. At least Mick had a dad, and his dad loved him. That was better than his own room, he guessed. Mick, his backpack filled with junk food snacks, sodas, water, his little camera, and extra sunscreen, trotted up the cracked and dusty walk to Devon's faded blue front door. All the houses in the neighborhood had gray siding and blue front doors. Some were brighter than others. Mick was almost afraid to knock at the door. What if Devon wasn't there? The way Devon had been acting the night before made Mick wonder. Devon was becoming less and less of the friend Mick was used to. It was like something was nibbling on Devon from the inside. It was eating up his smiles and, well, his personality. Mick blinked when the blue door opened. "Hi, Mrs. Marks," he said, to the tall, skinny woman with the short, mussed, dark hair. Mrs. Marks wore a pale yellow uniform shirt with dark blue uniform pants. Her brown eyes had circles under them, and her thin lips were pressed together. When she saw Mick, she managed a half-smile. "He's almost ready, Mick." Devon appeared behind his mom. Mick noticed the house smelled like oatmeal and lemons. "You boys have fun today," Mrs. Marks said. Devon lifted his backpack and grinned. "We will." Mick almost did a double take. Devon sounded downright enthusiastic about their hike. Was the old Devon back? If so, that would be coolio. The waterfall where Mick's dad had promised it would be, and it was as jiggy as he'd promised. The boys found a big flat rock near the base of the falls, just far enough to be out of spray range, but close enough to see the thrashing froth rolling around at the base of the falls. The falls weren't that tall, but they were wide and pretty powerful. Probably because it was spring and they were fed by winter snow runoff. Mick loved hearing the water roar as it plunged from the top of the bluff to the stone basin below. The falls were tucked into a stand of fir trees that enclosed the space around the falls. It felt like the boys were in a lush green cave in a distant land. It was pretty magical, Mick thought. He wouldn't have been surprised if squirrels or chipmunks came dancing out of the woods and broke into song. Of course, he knew this wasn't going to happen, but the falls made it seem possible. Devon's mood made it seem possible, too. Devon had been pumped up all morning. He had this, swag. It was swag. He was acting like he was all that. It was loony. Mick had to admit, though, that he liked this Devon better than the one who had been making him nervous over the last few days. Yes, Devon was still obsessing over that girl Heather, but at least he was talking, and smiling. Devon stood up and took a picture of the tallest fir tree beyond the falls. "I'm thinking this would make a great location for a scene in one of Heather's movies," Devon said. "Uh-huh." Mick had no idea what to say when Devon talked about Heather. Pointing out that Heather clearly didn't like Devon didn't seem to do any good. So he was going with his mom's NASAMLN technique. Nod and smile and make listening noises. Devon took a couple more pictures, and then he sat down and pulled a package of crackers with peanut butter out of his backpack. He nudged Mick. "I have a surprise for you." "Did you bring dessert?" Mick had eaten his packaged cupcakes already, but he was still hungry. Devon laughed. "No dessert. Sorry, but I did find us a new clubhouse." Mick sat up. "Really? Where?" "That's part of the surprise. I did what Kelsey suggested. I looked for abandoned places near here, and I found one. I'll take you there on Monday after school." "Why not today?" Devon grinned in a sly way that made Mick's breath catch for a second. "It's too far. We have to go east at the railway yard instead of west toward our houses like we usually do." Okay. Why did Mick suddenly feel like Devon was hiding something? He opened his mouth to ask what it was, but then he closed his mouth. Maybe a more subtle approach was needed here. Maybe whatever was going on with Devon, Mick thought it would be smarter to watch and wait instead of meeting it head-on. Devon finished his crackers, brushed crumbs off his face, and stood. "Come on, I want to scout more locations for Heather." Mick sighed. "Okay." Stuffing empty junk food wrappers into his backpack, Mick said, "But wouldn't you rather play scavenger hunt?" They'd been playing since they were small, and Mick loved it. One of them would find an object for them to find, and whoever would find the closest thing to it would get a junk food reward from the other. That's what they'd gotten most of the treasures they lost when their old clubhouse was torn down. A silver ring became a pop-off tab from a soda can. An airplane became a huge plane-shaped tree branch. A pizza became a big flat rock with pepperoni-shaped speckles on it. Devon shrugged. "Okay, we can do that too." Mick grinned and scrambled to his feet. "Okay, I'll pick the first object. Let's find a fan." Devon strode ahead. "Sure, why not?" It took nearly an hour to retrace their steps from the falls and get back into a familiar part of the woods. It took that long because Mick was running all over looking for something like a fan. When he found a big fern frond, they decided that would do until they located something better. It didn't look like they were going to find something better
until a crow pooped on Devon's shoulder. Mick saw it happen. They were strolling along the fir-needle-padded forest floor, and Devon was juggling 3 stones as they went. The crow sat on a high branch above their heads. It had cawed when they approached the tree it was in. Mick had looked up at it. As they passed beneath it, the crow flicked its tail feathers, and a big white splotch appeared on Devon's shoulder, in sync with a squishy, splatting sound. Mick started to laugh, but then he inhaled sharply as Devon instantly let loose one of the stones he carried, sending it streaking like a missile toward the crow. The stone hit the crow with a stomach-churning thwack, and the crow tumbled in what appeared to be slow motion to the ground. It landed a few feet in front of them. While Mick tried to process what had just happened, Devon gestured at the clearly dead bird. "If you want it, a wing would make a better fan," Devon said. Mick stared at the bird. The forest started to spin around him, and he stumbled back, bracing himself against a tree. "You okay?" Devon asked. Mick's mouth was so dry he couldn't speak. Devon started to stroll away, pulling off his shirt as he went. Mick dug a bottle of water from his backpack and took a big gulp. I don't need a better fan," Mick said, when he found his voice, which didn't sound anything like normal. Devon shrugged. "Can I have some of your water to clean my shirt?" Mick handed over his water bottle without speaking. He had no idea what to say. Maybe he was afraid to say anything at all. On Monday morning, Kelsey was waiting for Mick and Devon at their lockers. Mick was surprised, but pleased. Maybe they'd get to hang out at Kelsey's after all. "Hi, Kelsey," he said. "Hey, Mick. Hey, Devon." Mick wasn't sure what to expect from Devon. He knew Devon was mad at Kelsey. But Devon grinned and smacked Kelsey on the shoulder. Mick noticed Devon had a gauze bandage on his hand, but before he could ask about it, Devon said to Kelsey, "Dude, you have a good weekend?" Mick felt his eyebrows rising. "Huh?" Kelsey's brows went up a notch, too. He squinted at Devon for a second. Then he smiled and said, "Look, guys, I'm really sorry about Friday. That was awkward. I wasn't sure what to do. Then when George came back to get you, he said you weren't there. I didn't have your numbers to call you." "Not a problem," Devon said. "It was Ox, and it wasn't your fault." Ox? Mick had never heard Devon use that word before. Kelsey blew out air. The tentative smile he'd worn since he approached them morphed into a full grin. "I'm so relieved. I thought you guys would be mad at me. You'd have every right to be." Devon shook his head. "Nah, it's 5 by 5. 5 by 5? Mick felt like he was listening to a defective Devon clone. "Great." Kelsey nodded at several kids who rushed by him and waved at him. Then he chuckled and said, "We didn't make much progress on the hangout this weekend. Quincy and Gabriella flaked on me. And," Kelsey looked around, "in all honesty, Heather and her other friends weren't much help." He winked. "But I still don't mind having them around, you know?" Devon gave Kelsey a closed-lipped smile. Then he said, "I know." Was that a muscle twitch at Devon's jawline? Before Mick could answer that question in his head, Devon leaned toward Kelsey. "Listen, I found this place, this abandoned place, just like you were talking about. We could actually use that as a hangout instead of your place, or we could just take some of the seriously cool salvage for your hangout. Reclaimed materials make for super creative spaces." This is better than a sci-fi movie, Mick thought. Make for super creative spaces? He stifled a laugh. Kelsey grinned. "Really? You found an abandoned building? That's cool. I never heard back from my buddy. Are you suggesting we do some urban exploring?" "Exactly," Devon said. "We can meet after school, out back. It's not far, we can walk to it." "Okay." Kelsey gave Devon a fist bump and broke off to go to his first class. Devon glanced at Mick. Apparently seeing something in Mick's face, he said, "What?" Mick shook his head. "Nothing." He still didn't think he should say anything about Devon's strange behavior. Devon wouldn't have been surprised if Kelsey hadn't shown up after school. He thought Kelsey might suspect something. But nope. Apparently he didn't, because he was already waiting behind the school with Mick when Devon let the thick metal door slam shut behind him. Good. So far so good. "So where is this place?" Kelsey asked, squinting into the relentlessly bright sun and strolling towards the other boys. "It's kind of in the woods, about a mile east of the railway yard," Devon said, as the boys walked away from the school. "How come we've never heard of it before?" Mick asked. "We've both lived here since we were born," he said to Kelsey. Devon shrugged. "I don't know." With Devon in the lead, the boys carefully picked their way through the railway yard, stepping across the rails behind a string of lumbering metal freight cars rolling across the tracks. On the other side of the yard, Devon led them into the woods, and they picked up a winding, uneven trail lined with rotting, moss-covered logs and thick clusters of huckleberry bushes and salal shrubs. The air was moist and rich with a loamy smell that made Devon think of rainy days. He liked rainy days for the same reason he liked cloudy days. Mick and Kelsey chattered as they walked, mostly about TV shows. Mick was going on about a sci-fi show that followed an apocalyptic society in which people were killed for even the smallest mistakes. "That sounded interesting," Kelsey said. "Kind of up my alley in an extreme way." "What do you mean?" Mick asked. Kelsey shrugged. "Oh, I just mean I like legal shows, courtroom dramas. I'm going to go to law school so I can be a real judge someday." "A real judge?" Devon wondered what that meant. "You don't want to be a builder like your dad?" Devon asked. "Nope, I like building things, but I'm kind of keen on justice. Dad gets that. He says we should all do what we are passionate about." That's true, Devon thought. About 100 yards before they reached their destination, the trees thinned, and the sun's rays touched their skin. Devon felt the light and heat hit his face, and for just a second his feet faltered. "You okay?" Kelsey asked. "Yeah, I just tripped." As fast as it intruded, the sun retreated. Devon turned off the trail and ducked into a denser, darker part of the woods. The other boys followed him. "Are we there yet?" Kelsey asked, then laughed. "My sister always asks that when we're in the car." "Mine too," Mick said. Devon ignored them. They were almost there. He led them around a gnarled spruce, and there it was. He stopped and waited for Kelsey and Mick to catch up. When they did, he heard them suck in their breath in unison. "Whoa," Kelsey said. "Creeptastic," Mick said. Kelsey laughed. Hunkered in the woods in front of them, a big, low-slung building with a shallow roof line and a small boarded-up windows clung barely to life. Although the building was intact, it sagged and leaned, like it was getting too tired to stay standing. Because a bubble-shaped, filthy but unbroken skylight bulged from the top of the building, it looked like it wore a bowler hat. It was hard to tell what color the building had been when it was built. Now it was mostly green and black, streaked with mold, mildew, and moss. It was also being consumed by wild blackberry bushes. Aggressive, prickly regiments of the vines flanked the building on all sides. The boys could see from where they stood. The vines grew long, barely reaching the bottom of the building's front few windows, but they were thick, compacted together in a barrier that would demand a blood sacrifice to get past. "You don't expect us to go through those, do you?" Mick asked Devon. Devon laughed. "Do I look stupid?" He laughed harder. "Wait, don't answer." His laughs were high-pitched, kind of girly. Mick was looking at him strangely. "Come on," Devon said, leading the boys around the building. "What was it?" Kelsey asked. Devon gestured at the wall they were passing. An old, faded sign hung askew from under the weather-worn eaves. The sign was so faded you could only make out an F, a Z, and a P. But next to the letters, the image of something round defied the elements. "Is that a pizza?" Mick asked. "I think so," Devon said. "I think this was a pizzeria." "I love pizza," Mick told Kelsey. Kelsey smiled. "Me too. Hey, Mick, pull out your cell phone and see if you can find anything out about the place." "I'll do it, but I forgot my phone at home. I realized it after lunch. I don't think I've ever done that before. I feel naked without it." Mick laughed and pulled out his phone. "Don't bother," Devon said. "There's no cell service around this building." Mick held up his phone and turned it in a circle. "Well, that's a little spooky-o." "Come on." Devon motioned for the boys to follow him around the opposite side of the building. When his running shoes started making scraping sounds instead of the dull thuds they made in the forest, he gestured at the ground. "See? I think this was the parking lot." "Yeah, look." Kelsey pointed to the far side of the lot at a sign tacked to a tree trunk. Probably once white, it was now gray, but when Devon squinted, he could see the letter. "Stummers only?" "Customers only," Kelsey said. "Should we be here?" Mick asked. Devon glanced at him. "Why not? Does it look like anyone else cares about this place? Besides, no one ever cared that we hung out in the abandoned gas station." "He's got a point," Kelsey said. "Come on over here," Devon said. Although this side of the building looked like it was just as choked by blackberry bushes as the other side, Devon knew better. He stepped over a chunk of broken concrete and bent over. "Do what I do," he said to the others. Bent almost double, Devon poked his head into what looked like an impassable blackberry bush. But once you get close, it was clear the bush was growing around something. Devon didn't have any idea what this something was, but it had an opening. He dropped to his knees. "You have to crawl," he called back to the other boys. Mick groaned, but Kelsey shrugged and said, "That's the life of an urban explorer." Devon grinned. Kelsey was wearing jeans with torn knees. Devon was sure they were the kind you bought already torn. The kind that cost $100 at least, more than his mom would ever pay for a pair of jeans. It'll be worth it, I swear. Just go slow, Devin encouraged. He crawled forward. He knew Mick and Kelsey were to follow him. They were too curious not to. After about 4 feet of tunneling through a narrow opening, he reached a place where he could stand up. So he did, brushing his legs as he waited for the others. He looked up and around. He still wasn't sure what this was. It was a rounded enclosure, some kind of novelty entrance maybe to the restaurant. He thought part of the entrance had collapsed, which was what had made that tunnel-like way in and what had protected this part from the weather and the forest's damp air. "This is awesome," Mick said, popping up next to Devin. His breath smelled like his favorite grape soda, and his hair smelled like sweat. Kelsey got to his feet and looked around. Devin noticed one of Kelsey's knees was bleeding. "What is it?" Mick asked. "We used to live by the ocean," Kelsey said, "and there was this gift shop that had a shark's head at the entrance. I think this is like that. Not a shark, obviously, but some kind of animal head. See, there are the eyes." Devin looked up at where Kelsey pointed. He'd missed that when he was here before. To give himself credit, the first time he was here it was dark. That was Friday evening. He wanted to find an abandoned building before Kelsey's buddy from his last town could. So he'd headed out after dinner. His mother had fallen asleep on the sofa, as she always did. He'd gone into the woods to explore. He wasn't sure why he went at night. Maybe he'd hoped to get lost. He hadn't really cared, he just wanted to forget what had happened that afternoon. But instead of being lost, he'd found this place. As he'd explored it, an idea formed. He'd nurtured that idea all day Saturday and through Sunday morning brunch with his mom. When she fell asleep, again, he returned and poked around some more, and his idea grew into a full-fledged plan. The eyes, Kelsey pointed out, were 2 round, dirty windows, placed where eyes would be if this was, in fact, a head. And the place where the collapsed area lay was where an animal's snout might be. "I think you're right," Mick said. Mick turned around and gestured at the boarded-up door. He said to Devin, "So now what?" On the left side of the door, 2 boards leaned against the wall. Devin reached out and moved the boards, revealing a sidelight window next to the door. The glass in the sidelight was broken out. "Did you do that?" Mick asked. "Sure did. Want to take me to jail?" Mick frowned at it. "You expect me to get through there?" Admittedly, the sidelight was narrow, but Devin had slipped in with no problem, and he figured even Mick could manage if he sucked in his stomach and they gave him a push. "Yes, I do. That's why I brought this." He pulled from his backpack a roll of duct tape, and while Mick and Kelsey watched, Devin covered the inside of the window frame, which had held the glass, with thick tape. "This way you won't cut yourself when you squeeze through," he told Mick. Kelsey stared at Devin for a couple seconds, then said, "Thoughtful." "Yeah, thanks," Mick said. That's me, Devin thought, Mr. Nice Guy. When he was done taping, he turned sideways and slid through the opening. Once inside, he called, "Even though that skylight is dirty, it lets in enough light to see, mostly. Mick, why don't you go next? I'll pull if you get stuck, and Kelsey, you push." "Okay," Mick and Kelsey chorused. Mick's soft, round shoulder pushed through the opening. He flailed out a hand, and Devin grabbed it and pulled. "Ow!" Mick protested, as he escaped the opening and stumbled to get his balance. Kelsey slithered through past Mick. "You okay?" Mick rubbed his belly. "Yeah." They all looked around. "Coolfulness," Mick said. They stood in the middle of a huge square room lined with pictures of funky animal characters alternating with crazy and colorful geometric patterns. A domino-like stack of chairs sat against one wall, and another stack of tables lined the other wall. At one end of the room, a stage, its red velvet and fringed curtains pulled back, presided over the room, and on the stage... Creevy! Mick was rooted to the dirty red linoleum floor, his gaze latched onto the 3 figures on the stage. "What is that, a chicken?" Kelsey asked, gawking in the same direction. "I think so," Devin said. "Why does it have a cupcake?" Mick asked. "Maybe it's a baking chicken," Kelsey said, and immediately guffawed. Devin couldn't help himself. He laughed too. "Good one." Mick laughed as well. "Yeah." His stomach growled. "I wish that was a real cupcake." "Come on." Kelsey walked toward the stage. "Good." He was getting into it, Devin smiled. He and Mick followed Kelsey to the stage and looked at the figures closely. The figures seemed to be looking back at them, but of course that wasn't possible. Devin had to admit he was more comfortable being here today than he had been the day before. Yesterday he'd been spooked. He only came back today because... "They're animatronic," Kelsey said. "Yeah," Devin said. "That's what I thought." "Animatronic? Like robots?" Mick asked. "Sort of," Kelsey said. Animatronics can be powered in different ways. Sometimes they use pneumatics or hydraulics, sometimes electricity. Sometimes they're computer-driven. How do you know all that? Devin asked, in spite of himself. Dad worked on an amusement park resort project once. They had animatronic birds. Why a chicken, a rabbit, and a bear? Mick asked. A chicken and a rabbit and a bear walked into a pizza joint, Kelsey said, and all three boys laughed. Kelsey was a funny dude, Devin had to admit. Too bad he had to go and... Mick gasped. Is that a hook? To the left of the stage, a cave-like protrusion shrouded in a black, heavy curtain announced itself to be Pirate's Cove. Devin hadn't looked behind that curtain. Something about that hook. Come on, he said. There's more to see. Like a short, musicless conga line led by Devin's flashlight, the boys did a tour of the dirty pizza place. When Devin had first explored the pizzeria, he felt like he'd dropped into some kind of time warp. Although the interior of the building was damp and there was mildew in the places and on the ceiling and on the walls, it didn't have the trashed look you'd expect in an abandoned building. It seemed like the restaurant had been closed, and no one had been inside of it since. They found the kitchen stripped of its appliances and other equipment, but oddly, it had several jugs of distilled water lined up on the floor by one of the walls. A small office with an old scratched metal desk also had a filing cabinet that was intriguingly locked. If Devin didn't have any other plans, he'd want to break it open. Kelsey suggested it, but Devin said they'd get to that later. He led the other boys to a room with banks of control panels and ancient chunky computer screens, and then they visited a couple disgusting bathrooms with broken tile, cracked sink, and exposed pipes. While they were in the bathroom, Devin was pretty sure he heard something slithering through the walls. He didn't say anything. From the way the other boys' face paled, he knew they heard it too. They didn't mention it either, but they all quickly crowded through the bathroom door and ended up back in the narrow hall. The best part is down here, Devin said, motioning the others to follow him. Devin's heart rate picked up speed. He could almost hear his adrenaline revving at the starting line. He suppressed a smile. Why'd he think of that? He wasn't into cars. Storage? Mick asked. This is what you wanted to see? Devin grinned. Yeah, come on. He pushed the door to the storage room open, shined his flashlight into the room, and stepped back so they could see. It was like looking into some deranged person's closet. Headless animals hung on long rods that lined two walls of the room. Well, okay, not actual headless animals, but headless animal suits. The suits were dingy and dusty. Some were dark with mildew. They all looked stiff and ragged and ratty with fur missing in places. On the opposite wall, 3 rows of shelves held animal heads, bears and rabbits and birds and dogs. Every head looked a little battered, like it had been used as a bowling ball or something, but the eyes were in place for all of them. They all stared straight ahead like they lined up for roll call. It's creepy, Mick said. Devin looked at Kelsey. Kelsey's eyes were bright. He started poking around in the cabinets that lined the walls. Look at all this stuff, he said. He pointed at bins of nails, screws, brackets, wires, and what looked like metal joints. He whirled and grinned at Devin. You're a genius, Devin. I think I can salvage one of these suits and maybe build our own animatronic character for my hangout. Devin couldn't help but notice the use of the word my. Last week, Kelsey had said our. A sound similar to rushing water filled his ears. He was pretty sure it was blood racing through his veins in excitement. Look over here. He gestured for Kelsey to follow him and went back to the back of the room into a small corner closet. His feet made raspy scuffs along the floor that sounded bizarrely menacing. Devin had found the closet when he was here the first time, partially hidden behind the costumes hung on the inner wall of the room. He'd seen the potential in it, and that had given him his idea. However, it was his second visit that had locked it down, so to speak. Kelsey glanced at Devin, then grasped the closet's metal handle. Stepping back and to the side, he slowly pulled the door open a few inches. Satisfied nothing was going to jump out at him, he opened the door the rest of the way. Devin's flashlight beam reflected off a pair of big, round eyes. Mick crowded in behind them. What's that? Kelsey reached for the arm of the human-sized yellow bear standing in front of them. Devin knew what he'd discover. The arm was heavy. This wasn't just a furry suit like the ones hanging on the rods. This suit was an animatronic suit, Kelsey said. It has animatronic, abilities, I guess, but it can also be worn like a costume. I've read about some cutting-edge stuff they're doing with these, where you get in and the suit reads your vital signs in response to your pulse and temperature and stuff. Some can even respond to specific commands, let the wearer speak in the voice of the character. I'm sure that's not what this is, though. It's too old. I wonder how it works. He pulled on the arm again. Let's get it out in the open. I think it'll take all three of us. Sure, Devin said. We can do it. This was going even better than he'd imagined. He thought he was going to have to talk Kelsey into this, but it looked like he was going to do it all on his own. It was like it was meant to be. The three boys grunted with effort, Mick sneezing a few times when dusts and tufts of the bear's fur came loose. Working together, they managed to get the bear suit out of the closet and over to the middle of the storage room floor. They laid the bear on its back. Panting to catch their breath, they gazed at the strange character, whose sightless eyes looked straight up at the ceiling in the model of Devon's flashlight and the room's dark shadows. Let's drag it all out to the main room so we can see it better, Devon suggested. Yeah, Kelsey said. More grunting and sneezing got the yellow bear suit into the main part of the pizzeria. Once they had it in the middle of the floor, Devon knew it was time. Mick, why don't you go back and find lids to those bins of screws and stuff? You can stack them up and bring them out. We can take it with us for Kelsey's hangout. Mick looked over his shoulder at the gloomy hallway. Take my flashlight, Devon said. Mick looked back at the bear. Devon could see Mick shudder. Okay, he agreed. As soon as Mick left the room, Devon said to Kelsey, That bear looks like you. Huh? Well, not as cool, but his hair's got sort of the same color, and he's smiling like you usually do. If you got this suit working, it could be like the mascot of your hangout. Kelsey grinned. That's not bad. He leaned over and took the bear's head in both hands. Does this come off? He tugged, and the bear's head released from the suit. He looked into the top of the torso and sniffed. Doesn't smell too bad, no worse than the rest of the building. Nope, I noticed that too. He nudged Kelsey and grinned. Try it on. Kelsey studied the suit's neck opening and then shrugged. Why not? He sat down and started wiggling in the torso. Once in, he said, This is pretty comfortable. He grinned. Now the head. Devon had just clipped the head on when Mick shuffled into the room dragging a stack of plastic bins. No lids. I'm not sure how we're going to be able to take this stuff out. He stopped and stared at the bear on the floor. He looked around. Where's Kelsey? I'm in here, Kelsey called out. Mick's eyes widened. Kelsey sat up and said, I'm not sure how to stand in this thing, but hey, I could whack. He began throwing his arms around in elaborate dance moves. When he threw both arms straight out to his sides, an ear-stabbing metallic clap resounded off all four walls around them. The clap was followed by a fingernails on a blackboard scraping sound. As abruptly as it started, the scraping sound ended with a loud slap. This triggered a cascade of snapping sounds, like dozens of steel animal traps springing into place, one right after the other. Kelsey started shrieking with the first snap. Once when Devon was little, his mom was driving him to school, and she ran over a cat in the street. The cat didn't die immediately. Instead, it made a sound that was like all the sounds of suffering rolled into one. Screaming, wailing, howling, and other vocals Devon couldn't even describe. That sonic signature was embedded in Devon's brain. He'd always thought it would be the worst thing he ever heard in his life. He was wrong. This was the worst. And the sound wasn't the bad part. It was bad, yes, but the bad part, the really, really bad part, was the way the suit started jerking in a spastic, horrific dance. It looked like the moth-eaten, mildew-blotched gold bear was convulsing. But it wasn't the bear. Devon knew it wasn't the bear. It was Kelsey. What did I do? Devon thought. What's wrong with him? Mick yelled. Devon jumped. He'd been so mesmerized by Kelsey's suffering he'd forgotten Mick was there. Kelsey's shrieks stopped, like someone or something had severed his vocal cords, and the suit went still. That's when Devon noticed it was turning red. Deep, dark, wet red. Is that... Mick pointed. He dropped to his knees. That's blood. Devon sat back on the floor and pulled his feet right to his body. The blood saturated the bear's matted fur in seconds and began pooling on the floor. Because the linoleum was blood red, Devon's blood blended with the floor. The only reason Devon could see it was because Kelsey's blood was moving. It had formed an amoeba-like puddle that seemed to be crawling away from the now saturated bear suit. Devon stared at the moving blood. It looked like it was a living thing, a thinking red liquid lake stretching out, seeking. Devon scooted away even farther. He groaned and dropped his head into his hands. Meant to do? He'd planned to trap Kelsey in the bear suit and leave him like that for an hour or so to freak him out, as payback for what had happened. If he'd thought for a minute that this is what would... He was angry, yes, jealous. Since Friday afternoon, and maybe even before, he'd hated Kelsey more than he'd ever hated anyone or anything. He'd even hated Kelsey more than he hated his missing dad. He'd hated Kelsey because Kelsey had everything Devin wanted. Just when it was looking like he had a chance with Heather... Okay, maybe he'd been deluding himself about that, but still, he wasn't even given the opportunity to find out. Kelsey swept in and made friends with everyone in like 2 seconds. Devin had been trying his whole life to make one friend other than Mick. Kelsey had no right to have everything come so easily to him. But that didn't mean he deserved this. Devin brushed at his tears he didn't realize had formed in his eyes. Dev. He wiped his face and looked at Mick. Mick was sitting on the floor on the opposite side of the bleeding bear suit. Yeah, sure. Bleeding bear suit. Devin was still deluding himself. The bear suit wasn't bleeding. Kelsey was. Devin heard Mick hiccup, and he realized Mick was crying. His dirty face was streaked with tears, giving him a strangely tribal look, like he had vertical stripes of war paint on his cheeks. Poor kid, Devin thought. Mick wasn't mature enough to handle something like this. And Devin was? He barked a laugh. Mick's gaze, which had been riveted on the bear suit and the flowing blood, whipped to Devin. Why are you laughing? His voice was high-pitched. Devin shook his head. It's... Never mind, I think... Maybe it's shock. Mick stared at him for a few seconds. Then he shifted his attention back to the suit. He flinched. Look at it. It's still moving. He's still alive. We have to get him out of there. Devin glanced at the suit. It kind of pulsed, like it was a strange, bloody heart getting in its last beats. Mick repeated, We have to get him out of there. We can't, Devin said. What do you mean? Mick, his mouth hanging open, tears still leaking, his nose still running, continued to watch the occasionally trembling suit for... how long? Devin wasn't sure. He didn't feel like he was really there anymore. Obviously he was, but he wasn't. He was back in his past. He was watching his dad drive away the day he left, and never came back. He was watching his tired mother make yet another meal of boxed macaroni and cheese. He was in school, watching all the other kids laugh and joke with one another. He was hanging out with Mick in their gas station clubhouse. He was watching Heather, wishing she would notice him. He was relishing the moment when she said his name. He was listening to her talk about justice in social studies class. He could see her, in her red sweater, and he could hear her tinkling voice. I think justice is payback. Payback. That was all he'd intended to do. He'd wanted justice. Payback. Kelsey had hurt him. He'd made Devin think like he might be part of something, and then he'd thrown Devin away. It stung, like being stabbed with a sharp object. He'd wanted Kelsey to feel something similar, and maybe he'd wanted Kelsey to end up scarred, like Devin was scarred by every rejection he'd endured. But he hadn't wanted this. Not this. Accidents happen, Heather trilled in his mind. Devin yelped when Mick shook his shoulder. How did Mick get over here? Devin frowned and shook his cobweb-filled head. Why aren't you answering me? I keep asking you what you mean. What do you mean we can't get him out? Mick was close. Too close. Devin could see snot drying under Mick's nose. I mean, we can't because... Devin moaned. Mick studied him for several seconds. Then he slowly scooted away from Devin. Did you do this on purpose? Devin didn't answer. Did you? Devin tried to moisten his mouth enough to swallow. Did you murder him? Mick screamed. No! Devin shot up off the floor and started pacing back and forth. Suddenly, tears poured from his eyes, and he couldn't stop them. No! But what happened? Mick hugged his knees and rocked himself. Devin stared at the bloody suit. He rubbed his face. I wanted to get back at him. By killing him? Mick scrambled to his feet. No! Then what? When I was here before, I found the suit and I tried to put the arm on. His sobs distorted his words, he knew. He could see Mick concentrating, trying to understand him. The suit has these locking things inside. Once you snap it in place, it's almost impossible to get it off by yourself. Devin tapped the gauze in the back of his hand, where he'd torn off some skin escaping the suit's heavy arm. So you knew that would happen? No. I mean, yes, but no. I mean, I only wanted to scare him. I figured once he was locked in, we'd leave him in this place until sundown, just to make him sweat a bit. I wanted him to feel something unfair, like what he did to us. Like what I felt when he and his neighbor drove away with... I wanted him to get hurt. I didn't want him to actually get hurt, though. Not like that. The golden suit shuddered, and Kelsey let out a gurgle. He's still alive, Mick whispered. He started toward the suit, but Devon grabbed his arm. Don't touch it. Mick broke free, stared at Devon for a second. Then he ran toward the building entrance. We have to get help. Devon ran after him and grabbed his arm again. We can't do that. What? Why? We'll go to jail. You'll go to jail. You want me to go to jail? No, of course not. Haven't we always been in it together? Well, yeah. We're in this together, too. Devon turned and looked at Kelsey and the blood on the floor. The red rivulets weren't spreading as quickly, but they were still moving, crawling like an army of red soldiers across the linoleum. We can't possibly get him help fast enough. He's lost too much blood. If we try, we'll only get ourselves in trouble. Mick stared even harder at Devon. Are you even sorry this happened? Of course I am, Devon yelled. Mick held up his hands. Okay. He took a ragged breath. Okay. Devon realized he was shaking. He felt tremors in both of his legs. He had to concentrate to stay standing. He was a murderer. A chill skittered along his neck. He wasn't sure whether what he was feeling was because of what he'd done or because he was afraid he was going to get in trouble for what he'd done. He took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Mick rubbed his nose and looked up at Devon as if Devon was going to make everything better. Devon would never be able to make everything better. We can't undo what happened, he said. We? Mick objected. You make it sound like I was part of it. I wasn't part of it. Okay. Me. I can't undo it. So from here, we have a choice. Either we tell and I go to jail, or we don't tell and I don't go to jail. Either way, Kelsey is the same. I wish I hadn't done it. I'm sorry. Very, very sorry, but that doesn't help Kelsey. Me going to jail doesn't help him either. You're saying we should leave him? Mick's voice was hushed. Devon took a deep breath and let it out. Yes, that's what I'm saying. For at least a minute the boy stood there. Outside, a crow cawed. Another answered. Inside, the only sounds were those of Devon's and Mick's open-mouthed breathing. Both were stuffed up from crying. The uneven and quick huffing sounds they were making were eerie, but not as eerie as that dry, scuttling sound. What was that? Devon grabbed Mick's arm. Come on, where'd you leave your backpack? Mick pointed. It was against the wall near the entrance, right next to Devon's backpack. Devon made himself turn around and look for his flashlight. It was lying next to the stack of bins Mick had dragged out of the storage room. Making a wide arc well away from the bear suit and the blood, Devon strode across the room and got his flashlight. Did you leave anything else? He tried to ignore the fact that the scuttling sound was coming from the bear suit. Mick, whose eyes looked glazed, blinked and looked around. I don't think so. Devon willed his legs to function right. He still felt like he was shaking all over, and he was having trouble breathing. But he had to get them out of here. Shoving his flashlight in his backpack, he grabbed Mick by the arm. Come on. Devon slipped through the sidelight and yanked Mick through behind him. Mick grunted, but he didn't complain. Once they'd crawled out into the late afternoon sunshine, though, Mick spoke up. What about Kelsey's backpack? Devon looked back at the building. Should he go get it? And do what with it? No. No one was going to come out here. And if they did, and they went in, they'd find Kelsey. Wouldn't they? So what did it matter if his backpack was there too? Devon looked at Mick, who was looking around at the woods as if he was trying to figure out where they were. Devon grabbed his arm. Come on. And that's where we're leaving it for now. That... wow, okay, where do I start? So, I read this story beforehand, and that's probably one of the most shocking things that has happened in this series so far, which is, kind of saying a lot. I mean, we had a time-traveling ball pit, we had a girl who turns into trash, we had a dog murder, like a person, rip off a finger, kill a dog. We've had lots of stuff, just throughout this whole series so far, but this probably is one of the most crazy. But the story isn't done, of course. There's one more part, both in this story and in the book. So I'm going to do that as soon as possible because the ending is also really good. And of course there's the Stitch Wraith teaser. If you remember, at the end of each book there's another teaser about a mysterious character called the Stitch Wraith. If you don't know, you can go back to the other two audiobooks and read and hear me read that at the end of those as well. It's pretty weird. But in the meantime, thank you guys for watching or listening or something. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.